I was already composing my death report when she fell out of the sky. That is not a metaphor. That is not the kind of dramatic opening that soldiers use when they want to make their memoirs sound more important than they were. I mean it with complete and literal honesty. I, Commander Veiltis, of the Cathari 3rd Legion, was dictating my final battlefield transmission into a cracked recorder while crouched behind a collapsed transit bridge, watching 40 Vorkai siege walkers march toward us through the ash and fire of Duran 4, and then something fell from orbit and changed everything. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what the situation actually was, so you understand how impossible what happened next truly is. We had 200 soldiers left. 200 from 6 different species, representing what remained of the Allied coalition's presence on this planet. We had ammunition for perhaps one more serious exchange of fire. Our shield generators had burned out 3 hours earlier. The Vorkai, tall, gray, methodical, and completely without mercy, had been stripping this world of its resources for 11 months, and we had been the last organized resistance standing in their way. Past tense. We had been. By the time the sun dipped behind the smoke clouds that afternoon, we were simply the last ones they had not yet reached. The walkers were their finishing move. 40-meter armored machines that walked on 6 hydraulic legs and carried enough firepower to flatten a small city block with a single volley. They did not rush. They never rushed. That was the thing about the Vorkai that broke you before they even fired a shot. They were patient. They advanced like a slow tide, and you could watch them coming and know that your options were narrowing with every step they took, and there was absolutely nothing you could do to stop it. I had already sent the evacuation order 3 times. No response. Our communications relay was gone. Our air support had been eliminated 2 days prior. The 6 species behind that barricade with me, Cathari, Sulani, Drevith, 2 Parathi, a handful of Yin, and 3 humans attached to our unit as liaison officers. All of them knew what was coming. Some were praying, some were checking their weapons for the last time, with the focused calm of professionals. The 3 humans were doing something that still confused me then, which was talking to each other in low voices and occasionally laughing quietly at something one of them said. I had heard that humans did this, laughed near death. I had assumed it was a coping behavior, something that helped them manage fear. Watching them that afternoon, I was not so sure. They did not look afraid. They looked almost annoyed, the way a person looks when a meeting has gone on too long. I pressed record on my transmitter and began to speak. I gave our coordinates. I gave our unit numbers, or what remained of them. I described the tactical situation with what I hoped was clarity and dignity, because if someone was going to find this recording eventually, I wanted them to understand that we had not failed through incompetence. We had simply run out of everything. I said, "We fought well. Let the record show we did not run." Then the sky cracked. Not cracked like an explosion, cracked like something moving through the upper atmosphere at a speed that compressed the air around it into a visible white cone. We all looked up. Sensors on 3 different devices started screaming alerts simultaneously. Something was falling, and it was falling fast, and it was falling directly toward the open ground between our barricade and the advancing walker line. No propulsion trail, no parachute, no distress beacon, just a single shape in a military pressure suit, arms slightly out, head tilted at an angle that suggested, and I could not believe I was reading this posture correctly, casual interest in the view below. The figure fell for another 4 seconds. Then, at a height that made every experienced soldier behind that barricade inhale sharply, a single parachute deployed. It was a military crash chute, designed for emergency use. Never designed for anything like this. It slowed the descent by perhaps 30%. The figure hit the ground between our position and the walkers, with an impact that sent a visible crack running through the ash-covered ground, and a shockwave that knocked 2 of our smaller soldiers off their feet. Dust rose in a wide circle. The walkers stopped. We stopped. Everyone on that battlefield stopped. Then, from inside the dust cloud, there was laughter. Clear, genuine, human laughter. The kind that comes from someone who has just experienced something they found deeply enjoyable. The dust settled. The figure stood up, reached up with both hands, and rolled her right shoulder with the expression of someone working out a mild cramp. Then she pulled off her helmet, and I saw a human woman with red hair, a bleeding cut above her left eyebrow, and an expression of complete satisfaction on her face. She looked around at the walkers. She looked back at us. Then she picked up her helmet, tucked it under one arm, and walked toward our barricade at a comfortable pace, as though the Vorkai energy bolts now striking the ground around her feet were a minor inconvenience, like rain. She stepped over the barricade, looked at the group of us and said, "Who's in charge? And please tell me at least one of you has coffee. Orbital insertion does something terrible to the throat." Nobody spoke for a moment. I said, "I am in command. I am Commander Valethus." She extended a hand. I had learned enough about human customs to shake it. "Lieutenant Commander Mara Solis," she said. "United Earth Expeditionary Corps. I was on a courier ship. It had a bad morning. I caught your distress frequency on the way down." She was already looking past me at the Walker formation, her eyes moving with the focused speed of someone doing rapid calculations. 40 units. Interesting spacing. What's the ground composition here? Do you know? Mineral content? Density? Anything like that? One of our Sulani engineers told her. She nodded, still looking. "What's the structural frequency tolerance of that bridge wreckage?" she asked, pointing at the collapsed transit bridge we were sheltering behind. The engineer told her that too. She asked about wind patterns, about the walker's joint design, about the sight lines from 3 specific positions I would not have thought to identify. She asked these questions quickly, and listened to the answers with complete attention. Then she set down the battered satchel she was carrying, opened it, and began laying out its contents on a flat piece of broken stone. Lengths of detonation cord, 3 shaped charge packs, a manual signal amplifier that looked like it had been repaired at least 4 times, a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in a cloth. She picked up the sandwich, took a bite, and started giving instructions. She told me to move our 6 sniper-class soldiers. We had 2 Cathari, 2 Sulani, and 2 of the humans from the liaison team, to 3 specific positions she described with exact coordinates. She explained a firing sequence, a pattern that seemed counterintuitive, until she drew it in the ash with her boot and suddenly made complete sense. She told our engineering team to disconnect the failed shield generators from their power cells, but not to discard them. She worked fast. She moved from one thing to the next without hesitation, without second-guessing, picking up components and connecting them in ways that none of our engineers had thought to try. She converted the shield generator cores into something she called acoustic resonance emitters, tuning them to a frequency she calculated by hand on a small device she pulled from her jacket. The whole time she was humming, quietly, almost to herself, a rhythmic human melody I did not recognize. Sergeant Drevith, one of our senior soldiers, leaned toward me and said very quietly, "Commander, should we trust this?" I watched her work for a moment. Her hands were certain, her attention was complete. She had fallen from orbit 11 minutes ago and was now calmly rebuilding our defensive strategy with the contents of a shoulder bag. "Yes," I said. What she had built, by the time the walkers began their advance again, was something elegant in the way that things are elegant when they are made by someone who understands exactly what they are doing. The acoustic emitters were positioned at angles that would direct their resonance into the lead walker's structural joints. The vibration would not destroy it directly, but it would work against the mechanical tolerance of the joints, until the machine essentially shook itself apart from the inside. The bridge debris had been quietly rigged with her shaped charges, angled not to simply collapse, but to fall in a specific direction, creating a compressed corridor that would funnel any walkers that moved to flank us. The snipers were in position, each one briefed on a specific target, a single cooling port on the rear lower section of a walker's chassis. A design flaw she said she had read about in captured Vorkai technical files approximately 2 years ago. She had read it once, 2 years ago, and remembered the exact dimensions. The walkers were 400 meters out when she said, "Wait." 300 meters, 200. She said, "Wait." 150 meters. The ground was shaking slightly with each step of 40 enormous machines. Some of the soldiers behind the barricade had closed their eyes. She said, "Now." The first walker hit the acoustic field and began to shudder. It was subtle at first, a vibration that looked almost like a technical glitch, a momentary wobble in its stride. Then the wobble became a shaking, and the shaking became violent, and the walker's leg joints began to fail in sequence. one after another, and the machine went down sideways with an impact that shook the ground for 200 meters in every direction. The Vorkai reacted the way trained military forces react to unexpected loss. They adapted their formation and pushed harder. 7 walkers broke left to flank us. They moved directly into the debris corridor. Mara pressed a trigger. The bridge came down in a controlled cascade, exactly as she had calculated, and 4 of the flanking walkers disappeared under 3,000 tons of falling infrastructure. The other 3 stopped, recalculating. The snipers, following her pattern, hit their targets in sequence. Not all the shots connected. The ports were small and the angles were difficult, but enough of them did. 3 more walkers slowed, their cooling systems compromised, their movement becoming sluggish and unpredictable. Then Mara picked up the signal amplifier, checked a reading on it, and stood up. She stood up, fully upright, in full view of 30 remaining Vorkai siege walkers, in the open air above the barricade. She tuned the amplifier to a specific frequency and broadcast a command signal. One of the walkers stopped. Its weapons swiveled, and then it turned and fired directly into the walker standing next to it. The Vorkai formation broke apart. Friendly fire at that scale, from a machine that large, created exactly the kind of chaos that disciplined forces are least prepared to handle. Units scattered, targeting systems conflicted. 2 more walkers collided, trying to avoid the rogue machine. In the center of the formation, a Vorkai command unit began broadcasting override signals, trying to shut down the compromised walker. Mara let them almost succeed. She waited until the override was 70% complete, until the Vorkai were focused entirely on their own internal crisis, and then she detonated all 3 shaped charges simultaneously. She had placed them during her instructions phase, quietly and without announcing it, in positions that maximized the blast radius overlap across the densest cluster of walkers. When the dust settled this time, the walker formation was gone. Not destroyed entirely, some had withdrawn, some were disabled, but gone as a coherent fighting force. The Vorkai ground infantry, without their armored support, stood at a disadvantage against 200 coalition soldiers, who now had something they had not had 11 minutes ago. They retreated. The silence after a battle is a specific kind of silence. It is not peaceful. It is the silence of a room after something very loud has stopped, and your body has not yet accepted that it is safe to breathe normally. 200 soldiers from 6 species stood in that silence and looked at the empty ground where 40 siege walkers had been advancing to end them. Then everyone looked at Mara Solis. She was sitting on a piece of broken concrete, finishing the second half of her sandwich, reviewing something on her wrist unit. I walked to her. I stood in front of her for a moment. Then I asked the only question I had. "What are you?" She looked up from her wrist unit. She seemed to genuinely consider the question, which I appreciated. "I was on a transport that exploded," she said. "I had enough fuel in my suit to steer my fall to these coordinates. I had about 12 minutes of falling time to think through options." She paused. 11. Really. The first one I used to finish the first half of the sandwich. I think better when I'm not hungry. I processed this carefully. "You had 11 minutes, I said. 12, she corrected. 1 sandwich minute, 11 planning minutes. "You fell from orbit," I said, "and you spent 60 seconds eating." It was a good sandwich. She stood up, brushing ash from her sleeve. "Also, the eating was not wasted time. I do my best thinking when I'm eating. It is a personal quirk. My commanding officers find it irritating, but the results have generally ended the argument." She looked out at the quiet battlefield. Then she looked back at me, with an expression that was almost gentle. "Your people fought well, Commander. Don't let the last 11 minutes make you forget the 11 months before them. That mattered too." She borrowed someone's coffee before the transport arrived. She found it inadequate but drank it anyway. By the time we lifted off, she was already reviewing the next set of coordinates someone had sent to her wrist unit, humming her song again, completely absorbed. I finished my battlefield report that night. I tried several versions. I tried to find the correct military language for what had occurred. I could not. Every version I wrote was either inaccurate or insufficient. In the end, I wrote only this. The battle was lost. Then a human fell from the sky, smiling. By the time she landed, she had already won. I do not fully understand what humans are. I suspect they do not understand it either. I have begun to think this may be precisely the point.